It's online, classical, rapid, everything. And pawn to e4 played by Jorden. And Jorden has won only one game until now out of those 24, and that too he was worse in that game. So Magnus has a huge psychological edge against his opponent. He's beaten him many times, and he will be looking to do that one more time, and it often happens. By the way, Sicilian chosen by Magnus, fighting weapon. And it happens when you work for someone, that Jorden has done in the past. He's worked for Magnus as a second, so you naturally are under that influence that the person whom you're working for is really special. But on the other hand, Jorden is in a different mind space now. He's in this mind space, by the way, open Sicilian played, that he himself is angling to become the best in the world. And so let's see if this changes anything. Open Sicilian, and Magnus plays knight to f6. I wonder which Sicilian Magnus will play. Will it be the Najdorf? Because it's not often you get to see Magnus playing the Sicilian Najdorf with black. Yes, he plays it. Pawn to a6 played by Magnus. And now Jorden plays f4. A move that exists, but I'm not sure if Magnus would be prepared for it. e5 after 8 minutes of thought. One of the main moves here. And Jorden goes knight to b3. Now, simple way to play here is knight c6, bishop e7 and short castles. Magnus first goes bishop e7, and that allows fe. And this is slightly uncomfortable now to deal with, because after takes, by the way, just to point out, if you had instead of bishop e7 played knight c6, then if fe you can take with the knight. So that's a small difference there. D, and now he takes with the queen, and bishop takes d8, and you can see Jorden has 1 hour 30 minutes on the clock, which means he's well prepared. Bishop e3, and you will see that there is this little bit of dark square weaknesses. The knight could jump to a5 or c5, other knight could jump to d5, bishop e6 played by Magnus. So in a way, like, Magnus should be okay because his endgame is so good, but on the other hand, somehow Jorden is putting pressure now. b7 and e6 both are hanging. I mean, the best idea is to go back, but he goes bishop a5, and Magnus has seen that if knight b7 he can take here and take the pawn on e4. So Jorden first defends the e4 pawn with his bishop, and now the b7 pawn is still hanging. So bishop goes back to c8, which is logical. White's development is quite ahead as compared to black's. Knight b3 comes back, hitting the bishop on a5. Bishop takes c3. And you know, often we can see that these pawns are doubled, but what we fail to recognize are the weaknesses on the dark squares. They are so deadly often. Like, for example, the king no longer can safely sit on e7 because a check will hassle him. So bishop d7 played. Maybe Magnus just wants to put his bishop on c6, and Jorden jumps in to a5. Bishop c6 played by Magnus, defending as well as attacking here the e4 pawn. And if you take here, he wants to take back with the knight. So rook b1 played, putting further pressure on the b7 pawn. Magnus now gets the e4 pawn. Bishop takes e4. Knight takes on e4, and notice the time on the clock. Magnus down to 14 minutes only. Rook takes b7. The rook is active. The knight is well placed. The bishop is well placed. You can castle here, but Magnus decides to first develop his knight. Jorden castles. And now he has rooks active. Wow, look at those rooks. By the way, snatching the pawn is brave, maybe good, but he goes rook c8. And maybe this gives Jorden the time to save his pawn to c4. Yes, he plays pawn to c4, defended by the knight. Magnus goes knight to f6. And now knight c6, a beautiful move. Because if you take the knight, there's a check and you lose the rook. But Magnus takes it. So he realizes that if he castles, there's knight e7 and he loses material. So in order to coordinate his pieces, he's ready to give up material. Rook takes h8, taken by Jorden. And now rook takes c4, and Magnus has assessed this position as fine for him. By the way, just to show you, rook takes h8, rook takes c4, and now there's pawn to rook a8, rook a4, and pawn to c4 played. Magnus chops off the a2 pawn. Bishop comes to b6. And Magnus, look at that expression. He's like, what's going on? King e6, pawn to c5. We are on move 27. Magnus has to make 13 moves in less than 2 minutes on the clock. Rook c2, attacking the c5 pawn, and now takes here. The best move here is knight d5, but he makes a mistake, king e7. The point about knight d5 was that now you're putting pressure here, and after this you have king d7. But somehow after king e7, check. By the way, there was rook e1, which was very strong. It's all very difficult to understand these moves, but already Magnus has the only move, king e6, plays it, and Jorden comes back. Rook a6, Magnus is okay with a draw for sure. And now rook e1, once again you have the chance, because knight c5 is met with rook e5. That's the point. But he goes rook d1. Slight inaccuracy. But again, if you take here, there's bishop d8, which leads to a mating attack after rook a8. So, knight d5 played by Magnus. He brings his knight. Bishop d8 check. Oof, what a move. And Magnus comes back. King here. You can't take the knight. Mate. So, rook a8 played. f6, bishop takes f6, king f7. Magnus somehow, with just a minute on the clock, finding all the good moves. Here bishop g5, and he takes the pawn. And now once again he is in a situation where he should be able to hold this. Bishop c1, trying to get the bishop activated from the other diagonal. h6 played. Maybe there was a better move, rook c2 here, but h6. And now rook a7, bishop a3, both moves very strong. He gives a check. Magnus goes king g8 and h3. He finds time to make this move, although bishop b2 would have been very strong, attacking the e5 pawn. It's not just about the material anymore. If you look at the rooks, they are very powerful. So if you are able to coordinate your rooks, king h2, you just simply get in and start collecting these pawns. They can launch a mating attack. Rook d3 played. And this was the 40th move, because Jorden was also going low on time. And Magnus on the 40th move goes wrong with rook c5. If he had played rook b1, his chances to hold would have increased. But rook c5, this does allow bishop b2 as a move. And I believe Jorden has good enough time to work this out. The only thing is Jorden has to calm himself down. He is in a situation which he doesn't come into often against Magnus. A dominating position after move 40. Knight to f4 played, attacking the rook. And now rook c3, offering a trade of rooks. But he goes rook g3, attacking the pawn here. And Magnus goes to h5 with his other rook, with his other knight. And now rook c3, offering a trade. Very interesting. Rook d5. Well, there's no time for rook c7. Even black is coming in to attack here. So rook c2 makes a lot of sense. I'm stopping rook d2 from coming in. King h7. And Jorden goes bishop a1. He's dropping the bishop back. Keeping an eye on the e5 pawn. Knight g6. The knights are good pieces when the action is happening on one side of the board, which is what is happening here. The only worry for Magnus is that his king is weak and somehow the g7 point is weak and the bishop is very active. So he's not able to control the game. There's no stability as black. Rook d1. And now rook comes to e2. Black goes back, rook d5. And bishop comes up to c3. And knight to f4. And you have rook e3 played. So slowly Jorden coordinating himself better. Rook comes to b5. And now rook a5, offering a trade. If you don't trade it, I will take on e5. So he goes rook b3. And now a very cool move, bishop d4. Lovely move, breaking the pin, offering a trade of rooks. There's no rook b2. Notice the bishop controls that square. So Magnus takes. Bishop takes. And now you're on track towards victory. Knight to h4, attacking here. Now if you take here, this is very close to a draw. g5 would come in later. But the best move now is g4. Just protecting the pawns. But instead he goes bishop d2, allowing fg2, taking this pawn. And Magnus takes it. So he is perhaps out of the woods now. Although Jorden has understood that now both knights are touching each other. So which means that none of them can move. e4 played. And that's the beauty of Magnus's idea. He's going to play e3. He's going to try and get this bishop for that pawn. King g8. And rook a4. But now e3, a very important move to be played. Yes, pawn to e3. And if you try to save the bishop, there will be e2, e1 coming up, or first g5. You begin with that. So he takes, knight takes, and king takes h4. And we reach here, which is a theoretical draw. I mean, this should be a drawn position. But, okay, theoretical is a bit too much. I'm pretty sure Magnus knows this is a draw. But Jorden has his chances. And his chances are mainly because the knight can be cut off like he's doing right now. He's not letting the knight come back, king g6, but the knight is coming back. Now rook e5, attacking the knight. Okay, knight f5, king g4, h5, king f4. The knight is not fully stable on the f5 square. That's also a problem. King g4. And now Magnus has h5 check. King h4, king f4, knight h6, and the knight remains close to the king. But Magnus makes a very uncharacteristic error with knight d4, which allows rook e4. And now the knight is kind of pushed away from the black king. Can no longer stay close to it. Another lovely move, rook c4, which stops the knight from going to d6. So king goes back. He's hoping to get the knight closer. But now rook c6, taking away that square as well. So knight to d4 and rook d6. See how methodically the rook is kicking the knight away. I mean, if you don't play knight d4, I mean, it's difficult. Maybe there was g6 with the idea of knight d4, knight f5. Rook d6, good move. Knight b5. And now rook d7 played. Although rook d8 was more accurate, taking away the square. And Magnus now plays knight to c3, a big error. Here king g6 was a must to bring the king out, and a variation could have been something like this where black is holding. But knight c3 allows king f5, and this is domination, complete domination. Knight e2, rook e7, mistake, rook d3, and the game was already over. The knight was trapped on e2 with the king coming back. But pressure getting on to Jorden as well, who's down to a minute now. Check. Once again, we are in a territory where king g6 should get black back into the game, and Magnus gets it. King g6. Oh, or maybe we are back where we began, right? Actually getting back to that same position. Knight b5, rook c4. Yeah, we're circling around. And now a good move, king h5. Not sure if this is good or bad. By the way, a check here would have been met with a counter check, which was the point. King e5. By the way, don't trust the bar on this endgame. Too many things going on. King e6. Knight to a3 played. And rook d4. The position is again in the drawish margin. Knight b5. Can Magnus hold this? Rook d3. King h4 makes sense. He brings the king up. h5, g4 is the idea. King e5, h5. Let's go. Yes, pushing forward. h5. Rook b3. And now knight c7. But he goes knight a7, which is also okay. The knight has to survive. Meanwhile, black is trying to create a passer. g4 would have been good. Knight comes back. Rook c5. And now once again knight a7. Important, but he goes knight a3. A blunder. And maybe a very important mistake, because now king f5. And he finds it. This time it seems like the game is over. Knight to b1. And rook c2. Oh my god, he should have given a check first. King here. And then taken these pawns. But rook c2. Knight a3. Giving a chance again. Rook b2. g4. Magnus played that with 2 seconds on the clock. Takes. And now rook g2. Even king f4. The idea is now take this pawn. King h5. And rook a2. He had to play king f5. Threatening here, but knight c4. And maybe Magnus is once again saving himself. Knight versus rook is a draw, but knight away from the king can get trapped. Rook c2. And now very important move, knight b6. But he's going ahead again. Oh my goodness. Can't believe Magnus making these many errors in the endgame. But I guess these are the kind of endgames which are so difficult to understand even for a human. Even with the engine's help, it's difficult to explain why a certain move is good or bad. But here you can see knight b5 was losing to rook c5 check. So knight b1, and now rook d3 is just domination. Plays rook d3. The knight cannot move at all. And the king, if it comes to h4, it's over. He resigns the game. Magnus Carlsen loses the game to Jorden van Foreest. And I think Jorden thoroughly deserves victory in this marathon encounter. He really played well. Magnus defended quite well. And you can see there them discussing some things, and Magnus was like, why did I not play this?